Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, as promised, we're here with Carleton University's Stephanie Carvin, and we're going to talk about the Emergencies Act public inquiry and what the recommendations were coming out of it and what we learned. Stephanie, I guess why don't we start big and then we'll kind of drill down from there.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot we can talk about. You know what? I actually first want to say that I think Justice Rouleau did a good job. Like whatever decision he was going to make, he did a good job in the sense he actually provided a document that's very readable. It really does avoid jargon.
Mm-hmm.
It's super clear. I get the impression, I genuinely do, that this is actually a document he wanted Canadians to read, knowing that we're in a pretty heavy politicized environment right now, and maybe he wasn't going to convince people either way. But I think he figured he would try.
Yeah.
And in providing this document, it's so readable and very understandable. And maybe he felt, okay, well, if there is people who want to understand like how I came to this is it, right? So really, really good. I mean, some of my friends were joking, like, who writes like a 200-page executive summary? But honestly, everything you need to know is in that 200 pages. So I would just start off by saying, look, if you haven't at least read the summary, it's a very quick read, very, very quick. I mean, I think I made it. I mean, mind you, I've been following it a lot, so it's a little easier for me. But like, if you do want to, maybe you don't want to remember what happened, but if you want to know what happened, it's worth, I think, looking at this report, and I commend it to you. And I would commend Justice Rouleau on writing something that is just so very accessible, and in a way he might not have, right? Like, I've read a lot of Supreme Court decisions that have just been like, so good job.
I read a lot of those.
Yeah, right. That's your like actual job. So anyway, so I would just say the first step, read it, and good on him for writing something that I think he wanted Canadians to read. The second takeaway I think I have is not that surprised. I think that, I can't remember if it was you or like, I did a lot of media on this, but people were saying, well, what do you think? And I said, well, it's probably going to come down one way or the other. It's going to come like, obviously it was going to come down one way or the other, but like, I always felt it was going to be kind of borderline. Like either he was going to say it was understandable, but here are my concerns, or it was not understandable, or it was wrong, but you can understand why. And so I always kind of felt like it was going to be kind of 50-50. And yeah, we saw that. And he himself also says that this is something, he reluctantly came to the decision.
And said that, rational people can come to different conclusions.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I think those are probably like I have a lot of other takeaways here. I don't know if you want to talk about your impression.
I mean, it was kind of like in the midst of everything else over this past week, so I don't know that I have a solid impression on it because it was just amidst a fire hose of other news. But I think the whole failure of federalism aspect of it, I think, is really interesting.
It's super important
because so much of how the Canadian state is structured is around these federal, jurisdictional issues and federal bodies. And people are probably tired of hearing me talk about jurisdiction, but that's how the country works. And when you have a person whose jurisdiction it is, abandoning their authority or abandoning their responsibility, there's not a lot of mechanisms for other levels of government to pick that up. And that's something that I think this really just kind of emphasized.
Yeah, I mean, so shout out to my colleague Leah West, because he actually cites Leah in the report, because when she testified, she, as part of the expert round, she actually said this is a failure of federalism. And yes, it is. And I mean, you didn't say his name, but Doug Ford all over this, right? Like, I mean, Doug Ford has like a magical power to point his finger at Ottawa and make everyone's faces turn to Ottawa.
Yeah.
Even for areas in his own jurisdiction. That includes the convoy, that includes healthcare, that includes everything, right? Like, I mean, like
Yeah.
funding for healthcare, like, isn't that a provincial responsibility?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not my area of specialization. Like, I don't really know anything about healthcare.
Yeah. No, it is
Artist,
very
my
much
mom's foot doctor,
that kind
very
of
good.
magical power.
But
So
yeah, yeah. So, but this is the point, is that, like, I think that, and I keep wondering, like, why does he keep getting away with this? Like, why is he able to point his finger to Ottawa? Now, is it because that all of our politics reporters are in Ottawa and they're able to cover it? But, and, like, or is it because of the centralization, the way our system has increasingly centralized around this one figure, the prime minister,
yeah.
right? In a way that kind of reflects more US political system than our own.
And
Really yeah.
those are both aspects that do feed into what we see. And part of it is we have media who are happy to just both sides, and if someone says it's Ottawa's fault, then they are happy to run with that. Particularly when Ottawa says, "Oh well, we've all got our responsibility," and like they don't really effectively point the finger back to where it's supposed to go. So
Yeah,
people
but also,
end up
like,
getting confused.
at no time does the prime minister's office or the federal government ever turn around and say, actually, no, it's them.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Like, I mean, that doesn't happen either. Like, I mean, like,
yeah,
they're
exactly.
not helping themselves. Like,
And when they do, then it becomes squabbling.
oh, right. Okay. So we don't want a squabbling narrative. Or
Yeah,
maybe they want to take charge. I don't know. But, like, it's bizarre to me that that this doesn't happen, right? Like, anyway,
yeah,
so I think that you're right. That's the other major theme here. But again, I think it's kind of gone under the window. It was all about Trudeau. It really wasn't, even though it was really damning at Doug Ford. And to be fair, all of the political tools were provincial.
yeah,
That still, I don't think, has kind of dawned on people, that this was like a provincial matter that just was neglected to the point of invoking Emergencies Act, because no one either could deal with it in Ottawa, wanted to deal with it in Toronto, and was kind of shrugging their shoulders in Ottawa. And it's this bizarre situation. And even during the convoy, I remember thinking, where's the provincial government? Like, this is your literal job.
yeah,
And I don't feel that people were turning to Ford for answers. Now, I think Ford was up promoting free fishing day for families or something. And he was up at his cabin or something. Fair enough. Fair enough. But, like, again, I just don't think that, even in all the criticism we see, and, I do follow a lot of these kind of convoy freedom supporters, and I've been trying to follow their reaction and stuff. Again, all about Trudeau, nothing about Ford, just wild. Anyways, yeah. So that I think is the other takeaway. At least he identified the problem. Now, it still seems that no one's really picking up on that, but there you go.
yeah. There's a couple of pieces, and I think Matt Gurney had the best one. We said it wasn't a failure of federalism; it was a failure of Doug Ford. But
Oh, I need to read that.
it's on the TVO site. So
I will happily read that.
all right. So with that in mind, there are 56 recommendations. What of those stand out for you?
So that's interesting. So of those 56, I believe 25 are just policing. So it's funny, he took a very wide view of the mandates, and that's reflected in the report, and then took a very narrow view of recommendations, most of which are very detailed recommendations on how different levels of government should communicate during a convoy or similar style event in the future. So that's interesting. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot more about kind of information sharing. And then in the end, there's like a couple recommendations about, like, we should do more to study kind of violent extremism. But that's it. And what's really interesting is so many people who I hang out with on the national security side were expecting more on the national security side, right? Like, that there should be a review or other. Nope. He did no interest in national security. And I mean, that's fine, because that wasn't what he was asked to do.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's fair for him to say, like, I'm just going to look at what happened, and this is how I think you prevent another convoy style situation. And he gives that information. But yeah, this wasn't kind of a breathtaking report on national security. Some people have written editorials about how that's a missed opportunity, but sometimes I think that because some of us national security types are so thirsty, for lack of a better word, for more attention to these issues and for like more government action, because it's so rare that we just want to jump on any issue and call it a national security issue. So there's like the pandemic, the environment, the convoys. Now, my view is that these are not national security issues. They're political issues with national security elements in them. And yeah, maybe I would have liked to have seen a little bit more about national security on this, but that was not the point of this, right?
Mhm.
So I think that, we have to be really, really careful on declaring things national security issues. We don't want to securitize things that should not be securitized.
Right.
And
And
we
there
did
was
that
some,
with AIDS. We did that with so many things, right?
yeah.
And it's never worked great.
Yeah, and I mean there was something particularly around expanding the definition of national security threat to include economic threats, and whether that makes it too easy for a future government to overreach in that regard. So I don't
Right.
know. I don't know if you had any thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting.
And I think what flows into that with me is when I hear like CSIS talking about securing IP and those kinds of things as part of economic security for the country. So I can see a link there, but I don't know if you're making the same link that I am.
No, well, it's interesting because I think if you look at the government, so it's interesting. So I'll start off like this. Craig Forsees did a study, and he looked at every use of national security in all the laws in Canada. I think he came up with 37 different definitions of national security. The one I start with involves the political. If you look at it, the government of Canada calls it political, social, and economic stability. And I've always felt that was too broad, right? Because like a stock market crash is not a national security threat. A company making a bad investment decision is not a national security threat, but IP theft arguably is, especially if a state's using covert means.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be, again, like I just think we have to be like really. I prefer to be narrow than wide when it comes to national security issues. I think the fewer national security issues we have, the better. But we have to responsibly widen our understanding of what national security is. One of the interesting things I've recently learned is that, and I'll give you, just to give you an example, there's been a lot of criticism of police forces, rightfully so in a lot of ways, that they don't treat ideologically motivated violent individuals the same way that they do, say, religiously motivated violent individuals. Right. And it's interesting. I think what they're trying to do generally is look at this space as, what is a crime and what is actually a national security issue. And that if you look at it like things like hate crime, hate speech, graffiti, vandalism, all those kinds of things, when they're motivated by ideology, are important, but they're in the realm of crime.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas an ideology, so what, like, if you have an individual, however, who's trying to create larger societal change, and use violence to further those views, that is radicalized extremism, and it's different from that kind of criminality. So I think so to get back to the point here, I think trying to keep things in a criminal space as opposed to a national security space, it's like barring all the problems with policing we have and all these other issues, and I think Matthew Green from the NDP has called for some kind of inquiry on policing. I would support that as well. Now again, we have the Doug Ford problem, which is probably beyond the scope of a small little video podcast. But I think that, when we right size issues, it's for the best, right? Let's not try to turn everything to a national security issue. Let's look for those national security issues in political problems, deal with them as such, and then go forward. So yeah, this is a very roundabout way, Dale, of saying that there's not a lot of national security in this report, and that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. I think The other thing, I guess my own observation was all this talk about intelligence sharing. It seemed to me that throughout the crisis, there was intelligence being shared, but the people who were supposed to act on it didn't believe it and didn't act on it. So how much of that is a failure of the actual sharing, and how much of that is just the failure of the Ottawa police in particular to operationalize it?
Yeah, this is the other thing that, like a lot of people keep calling the convoy an intelligence failure. I don't see that as an intelligence failure because you had the intelligence, you just
Yeah,
didn't
I
use
mean,
it.
we could all see, their stated goals, and they broadcast them pretty effectively.
Right. So, I mean, but this was an interesting point, and actually, this is something we could touch on. One of the things he does talk about is the use of open source.
Yeah.
Because one of the key challenges that the government has right now, or at least I think the security services, is that they don't know what to do with some forms of open source. Like, some people are saying, well, it was out there. Why weren't you on social media? And then I'm like, listen to yourself. Do you really want CSIS just trolling social media looking for things? Like, that's a bad idea. Like, it's not, I understand that this is a thing, but like, we just don't want to have like our intelligence services suck up a vast amount of information, store it for whatever reason, and then use it in ways that are whatever they want. We need to figure out open source, and he says that in the report. So I think that was perhaps from a national security perspective one of the more important takeaways. I strongly suspect, and this will be an issue I think for another day. It's an issue that I think Leah West and myself will be trying to write about in the coming months, which is about how what to do about open source information. And I honestly don't think that it should go to our traditional national security services. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to come up with some way of collecting, searching, and storing open source information in a way that is charter compliant, right? Yeah. And is legitimate to the public.
And isn't just a giant fishing expedition.
Exactly. Or a giant data pool.
Like open net trawling or something like that.
Honestly, yeah. So I strongly suspect there'll have to be like a separate agency. Yeah. Something outside the intelligence and national security community, but something that perhaps where queries could be made with the proper authorities, right, in place, right? Yeah. But I don't think like I said, I don't think CSIS. Now, that being said, I know CSIS is using open source information. Everyone's using open source information. I would actually say the pandemic fundamentally changed attitudes towards open source information and what you can do with it. And then on top of that, the fact that the war in Ukraine is just there's open source information anywhere, like all the missile attacks and things that people document, geolocate them. Like it's unbelievable what you can do with open source these days. But we need to come up with a government of Canada approach that is legitimate in order to do that. He says that in the report, so I should have given him credit there. I forgot. Yeah. So regarding the intelligence sharing, the police. I don't know what was happening with OPS. Ottawa Police Services, right? Like, other than
I have my opinions on the police force in and of itself, but
it's just really bad. And I think I think he does end up taking Chris Keyes, the author of the kind of infamous report now that cites basically Rex Murphy as an expert, to task in the larger report of that. This is beyond the executive summary, and but what concerns me about that is, well, a couple things. One is that clearly intelligence was being received by actors, but you say but the internal pipelines to bring it into decision making weren't there. That's actually a Canada-wide problem. Even in our own federal government, like, we don't have a national.
That was a big thing with the pandemic early monitoring. The monitoring was there, but there wasn't necessarily the power.
No, I disagree with you there. I disagree. I think that's something that's been put forward. The monitoring that was being done, so the monitoring that's being done at Department of Defense wasn't proper pandemic monitoring.
No, I didn't mean the Defense Department. I meant at Public Health Agency. So
okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, but
this just feeds into this is a Canada-wide problem.
This is a Canada-wide. No, absolutely, yeah. So we don't have like a National Security Council. We don't have I believe in the US is the UK, it's the Joint Intelligence Committee. There's no mechanism through which to feed intelligence up to cabinet decision making, things like this. It tends to be pretty random, and it's getting better.
Yeah.
And governments, starting with her, Stephen Harper, now Justin Trudeau, like they have definitely used intelligence more than prime ministers since the Second World War, honestly.
Mhm.
So I think that this is something that is important. It's one thing, it's, we're generating intelligence reports, but if they're just going to a giant black hole, then what good is it?
Yeah.
The second thing that concerns me with the Ottawa police generally is that, Chris Keys was writing in a way that I think he felt his colleagues would understand what he was saying and all the innuendo in it, right? And
Mm.
that's indicative of bias.
Yeah.
And we haven't had any kind of accountability from the Ottawa police force for that. There's very legitimate concerns about convoy support, not just in Ottawa police services, but RCMP sees other places like this. We should be taking that seriously. And we also have not had accountability on that either. And yeah, I mean, so I think this report is great. I would like to see, I don't think anyone's ever going to hold Doug Ford to account. I'm not sure anyone in Ottawa these days is interested in holding the police to account. And that's unfortunate. But what we can do
Especially
from this,
post-election. Yeah.
at least we now know why we're depressed. Hey, like you spelled it out pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Like at least we know why we're angry.
Yeah.
And that's a good contribution as well.
All right. Well, I think we've gone probably over time here, but thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation, and we will do this again before too long.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.